Welcome to this channel, Baruch Haba Bashem Yahuwah. And thank you so much for coming to this channel. Today I'm going to do part 7 in the in-depth studies named Changed into His Likeness. And the title of this part is The Covenant of Grace. One striking feature marks the 13 years that followed Ishmael's birth. Throughout them all, Yahuwah did not speak to Abraham. His record is empty. What we have done on our own, Yahuwah leaves us to get on with it. He does not speak. But when Abraham was, so to speak, dead, dry and old, and could no longer have a son if he wanted one, then Yahuwah spoke to him. The starting point of all our progress is in Yahuwah's gracious call, not in our desires. Abraham had not repented. Rather, Ishmael was growing yearly more precious to him. He had not realized his wrong, nor sought after Yahuwah. From our standpoint, measuring him by all we have said so far, there was not much hope for him. But his hope was not dependent on whether he wanted Yahuwah, but on the fact that Yahuwah wanted him. Yahuwah was still at work on him. He had not let him go. If Yahuwah wants a man, that man cannot escape Yahuwah's hands. How we need to learn to commit ourselves to the hand of the Almighty Yahuwah. So after these years, Yahuwah spoke to Abraham again. When Abraham was 99 years old, the Most High, Yahuwah, appeared to Abram and said to him, I am Yahuwah Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. Genesis 17 verse 1. For the first time, Yahuwah uses the title Al Shaddai, Yahuwah Almighty. Abraham knew Yahuwah had power and was mighty, but he did not know him as Almighty. Yahuwah said, learn this and be blameless, that is to say, unblemished by the world. Now Yahuwah made a covenant with Abraham. Yahuwah wanted a people who would spring from him. And he defines in the terms of the covenant where they must stand in order to be such a people. I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly. Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant to be Yahuwah to you and your descendants after you. The sign of the covenant was circumcision. They were to be a people with no confidence in the flesh. That's what we need to step out of. We need to step out of the confidence of the flesh, because that brings us nowhere. They must not only be born and called forth by Yahuwah the Most High, they must bear in their flesh His sign. To be born and to be bought with a price. So here you can already speak of the first, you can say the first time that we were bought with the high price too. But a different high price then was been given at the moment when Yahushua Mashiach was hanging at the stake. That price was tremendously. So actually there are two moments in history where the circumcision takes place and where people have been saved. But the circumcision in the time of Abraham was a flesh one, that was a physical circumcision. Nowadays, when we get immersed, we are being spiritually circumcised in our heart. Our heart is being circumcised. And it means also that our heart is being changed. It means the stony heart is being taken out and a more heart of life has came in. A heart of what is called in scriptures a heart of flesh. But it's not the flesh in the sense of flesh. It's in the sense of a heart that is spiritually cleansed. A spiritual heart that is circumcised, on which the law of the Torah has been written, because Yahuwah said, one day I will write my words, my law, on their inward parts. Yahuwah has redeemed us and begotten us again. So this is, you can say, the first time redemption, and then there was a second time redemption, and now we are going to a third time redemption. And that is what people do not realize. Because with the coming of Mashiach Yahushua for a second time, our third time of redemption comes. So we are being for 3 times we have been redeemed. Wow. So Yahuwah has redeemed us and begotten us again, but we are still not in the position of Yahuwah's people, maintaining His witness in the earth, fulfilling His purpose, unless there is effective in us what is meant by circumcision. You shall be circumcised, runs the command, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. And it continues, the uncircumcised male shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Genesis 17 verse 11 and verse 14. Note carefully that those not circumcised were not therefore exterminated like the people of Canaan, for this is not a question of salvation but of witness only. Their name was cut off. In other words, we may be redeemed and possess new life, but if we do not recognize the stake of Mashiach Yahushua as dealing with the flesh in us, we have no name as His witnesses. What then is circumcision? The disciple Paul tells us that in Mashiach, Yahushua, you were also circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, because the circumcision that is being done in your heart, the circumcision of your heart is being done by Mashiach Yahushua himself. That is a spiritual circumcision. That is what is meant without hands. By putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Mashiach Yahushua. Colossians 2 verse 11. Elsewhere he says, we are the circumcision who worship the Most High Yahuwah in the Spirit, rejoice in Mashiach Yahushua, and have no confidence in the flesh anymore. Philippians 3 verse 3. And then he goes on to catalog the various grounds he had previously felt himself to have for such confidence. They turn out to be things in no way sinful or wrong in themselves. His racial purity, his strict religious upbringing, his sincere zeal for the Most High Yahuwah, these things were not sinful at all. They were simply grounds for natural pride. But those who are in the flesh cannot please Yahuwah. You only can please Yahuwah in the Spirit and in truth. Romans 8 verse 8. The trouble today is that we do not recognize this. Romans chapter 7 is Paul's description of one who is doing his best to please Yahuwah in the flesh, and it is one big cannot. Sin in a man is comparatively easy to deal with, but when it comes to having a part in Yahuwah's work of recovery, the trouble arises with the flesh that wants to please Yahuwah. It is here that the stake of Mashiach Yahushua comes to our aid. It undermines our self-confidence so that, for example, we can no longer speak as dogmatically as we did, but it gives us a wonderful confidence in the Most High Yahuwah. It is as though Yahuwah said to Abraham, what you need is faith and not works. You tried 13 years ago, but I promised not in order that you should bring it about, but because I intended to bring it about. Circumcision was the sign of that. It is to be a sign for all generations of Yahuwah's children, that they know that in the flesh they are helpless. A sign is peculiarity. We see it, and by it we recognize a person. What is the distinctive mark of our believer's life before men? Is it wisdom or honesty? Is it love or eloquence? In the word of the Most High Yahuwah. No, the feature that distinguishes the people of the Most High Yahuwah is their lack of an overweening self-confidence. Alas, it is a feature hard to find. As young believers, we know everything. Salvation, the fullness of the Spirit, the will of the Most High Yahuwah. we are quite sure we know Yahuwah's plans for us. But do we truly? But where is the fear and the trembling? Where is the uncertainty that knows it may well be mistaken and that leans on the Most High Yahuwah? In chapter 15 we read of Abraham that he believed. Now in chapter 17 the fulfillment of the promise is near, yet it seems that Abraham's faith had and has dwindled. We are told that he fell on his face and laughed. Genesis 17 verse 17. It was probably the only position in which he dared laugh. For him and Sarah to have a son now was ridiculous. After all, he was a man of 100 years old. He had heard nothing like this. His early faith had been true faith, but even that had an element of self-confidence in it. And now even his faith was dead. He had not backslidden. This was part of Yahuwah's work in him. The father of the faithful has to lose his faith, for it had been a mixed faith in Yahuwah and in Abraham. Yahuwah was bringing about in Abraham a new quality of faith. That love was not a love at Yahuwah, but a love at himself. And not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old. And the deadness of Sarah's womb, he did not waver at the promise of Yahuwah through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to the Most High Yahuwah, and being fully convinced that what he had promised, he was able also to perform, and therefore it was accounted to him for richness. Romans 4 verse 19 and 22. This is true faith when we are defeated and Yahuwah does not speak. He is leading us to the end of ourselves and to a complete confidence in him. There is no substitute for that. We try to help the Most High Yahuwah out and inflate our faith and make long prayers, but nothing happens. There is prayer which shows no self-confidence, which cries out in the midst of doubt and fear. I don't know whether it is any use or not to do so, but I believe. Yahuwah can use faith that is exercised in the midst of extreme doubt. Faith as small as grain of mustard seed. So a little bit of faith is already enough. And if you know how small a mustard seed is, that is really smaller than this. It's the size of a pinhead. With the matter of circumcision settled, we move into chapter 18 and find Abraham in the most privileged position of a friend of Yahuwah. This is quite the most remarkable chapter in the Old Testament. Abraham is still in memory the place of fullness. 3 men come to him, and one of them is Yahuwah in human form. This occurs in no other place in the Old Testament. Yahuwah appeared not as before in glory, but walking, bringing 2 messengers or angels. They actually prefer to be called messengers. So Abraham recognized him and addressed him as my master. He received the 3 of them as guests, inviting them to rest and wash and eat. This was fellowship and intercourse with Yahuwah of a new order, as the latter part of the chapter shows. Abraham was taken into the divine councils to have a part in them. He was Yahuwah's friend. They talked of Abraham's son yet to be given. Now it was Sarah who broke into laughter. With Abraham, the question was already settled. It was this that had qualified him to be Yahuwah's friend. The story of Sodom works itself out, and after that a strange thing happens. Abraham is subjected to his second test with regard to his son. This takes place at Gerar in the land of the Philistines. Philistines, also known as Palestinia, Philistines. Here Abraham comes to dwell, and as he did before in Egypt, he tells a lie to Abimelech, king of Gerar. After chapter 18 and Abraham's fellowship with Yahuwah, this is difficult to understand, but there is a difference here from the incident in chapter 12, for when Abimelech rebukes him, Abraham explains why he did it. It was a thing they had planned together back in Mesopotamia. We thought Yahuwah wanted us to move about in this land. We thought you were idolaters and we were afraid, so we made this plan. The thing had not originated in Egypt. It only came to the surface there. It had its roots in Mesopotamia, and now here in Gerar it crops up again. Abraham is put to shame. He has to learn that Sarah cannot be separated from him. In Mesopotamia, he had thought she could. Abraham represents faith. Sarah represents grace. It is impossible to separate them. If the one is gone, the other is useless. Here was once more treacherous thing. So here was one more treacherous thing that had to be rooted out before Yitzhak could be given. Faith that does not rest on Yahuwah's grace is valueless. You cannot sacrifice Sarah. For Sarah's sake, the whole of Abimelech's house was punished. Chapter 20, verse 17 of Genesis. Abraham was required to pray for them. It cannot possibly have been an easy thing to do. The women of Gerar were barren. How could he pray for them when his own wife had the same trouble? for other things yet, but how for this? But he did not ask that question. Now he had completely overcome the fears and questions and doubts that had their root in Mesopotamia. He says, my wife is Yahuwah's affair, and so are theirs. I have no confidence except in Yahuwah. The lurking fear had been dragged out into the light of day and slain. He was free to pray for others. He did not pray for Sarah, for now he had no need to. Immediately after this, Yitzhak was conceived. The Most High Yahuwah visited Sarah as he had said. And the Master did for Sarah as he had spoken, and in this case, of course, Master Yahuwah. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which Yahuwah had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Yitzhak. Genesis 21, verse 1 to 3. So, and with this said, I have come to the end of this part 7. And the next time is part 8, that's called the gifts or the giver. So that's also an interesting part to read. And Changed into Your Likeness is a very interesting study to listen to ponder upon, to meditate upon, to do your prayers upon. And please ask Yahuwah, the Most High, or His Ruach HaKadosh, if you have difficulties with understanding what is being said, what Yahuwah is passing on to you through me. And for now I say, have all a Baruch day, and do not forget to praise the Most High Yahuwah in all the things you do. And Baruch haba b'Shem Yahuwah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Baruch Yahuwah, Baruch Yahuwah, Baruch Yahuwah. I see you with the next interesting part of this in-depth study series.